In an alternate reality, we would have found out by now if the Formula 1 grid will soon get a new team. But whether the answer arrived in June as planned, comes this month or even later, there doesn't seem to be any world in which all the major stakeholders actually agree that it's a good idea. The process is at least coming to an end, and while we don't know for sure which way the final decision will fall, it would be a surprise if it's good news for the likes of Andretti and General Motors. Since the search for potential new teams began in February at the behest of FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, we've been waiting longer than expected for news on whether anybody will join the grid. The opening phase invited any interested parties to submit a preliminary expression of interest, and those that did were then given complete requirements for the full application process. This then had an initial deadline of April 30th or the Sunday of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend, but it was extended to May 15th because more information needed to be requested. Those that submitted a full application were subjected to a detailed due diligence process of the applicant and all individuals proposing to participate in the ownership, control or management of the team. The selection criteria includes the technical and financial resources of the team and, for the first time, considerations of sustainability and equality, diversity and inclusion. F1 itself may also impose additional selection criteria or conditions in the application process, as though the process is managed by the FIA, the governing body doesn't have total control. The original April deadline meant a decision on whether any new team will join the grid was expected by June 30th, but this was only ever treated as a target. Once it slipped back to mid-July, with July 15th commonly cited as the new deadline, the same applied. It was a target, not a concrete deadline. And that's almost certainly going to be missed as well, which is why we're here speculating instead of expecting an outright decision. Multiple parties have talked up their interest in joining the F1 grid, although it's not clear how many full applications this turned into. And unless the parties that registered their interest decide to come forwards themselves, like Andretti Cadillac and Hitech have done, their identities may officially be anonymous until the FIA communicates something. The Andretti Cadillac collaboration and the would-be expansion of Hitech's junior single-seater empire were considered the most serious proposals by many in the paddock. By entering under the Andretti Cadillac name and announcing it would be working closely with General Motors, the Michael Andretti-led project appeared to tick the biggest box asked of it, bringing in a manufacturer as a partner. It had been notable how the Andretti concern has conducted its business more privately after finding little favour among F1 and the existing teams with what was perceived to be a misguided initial approach with brash public comments and a fundamentally flawed plan, but we'll come to that shortly. As for Hitech, it set its plans to bid for an F1 entry in motion a long time ago, and formally announced its hope to be given a slot on the 2026 grid in a press release that majored on the news that Kazakh businessman Vladimir Kim has taken a 25% stake in parent company Hitech Global Holdings Limited. Other interested parties have included Pantera Team Asia and its curiously named offshoot Lucky Sons, while former BAR F1 team boss Craig Pollock revealed in March that a project to create a Middle Eastern funded gender equal team called Formula Equal had been conceived with a 50-50 split of male and female staff at all levels throughout the company. The Andretti Cadillac bid has been the most talked about, has apparently impressed the most behind the scenes, and become a great case study for the issues that have dominated this process. One concern is that it would just be the same Andretti project that hadn't won over senior figures in F1 previously, with a pseudo works deal attached. For example, using a customer engine as Andretti Cadillac in 2025, then badging that engine in its own name the following year. Anybody related to the bid has always stressed that General Motors would be heavily involved throughout, treating it as a proper works project and even dangling the vague promise of a potential full-on engine program eventually. And one of the project's most senior figures recently claimed that GM's immediate contribution and the plan for how the team would grow in the future would have surprised those who've seen the application. Bringing in two American brands in Andretti and Cadillac would on paper be a perfect match for F1 and its efforts to grow or at least sustain its increased level of interest in the United States. But many teams doubt that. Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur said a new entry would need to be permitted for mega good reasons and stressed the nationality of the team is no such thing. He reckons a top American driver is more important, a stance backed up by Mercedes team boss and co-owner Toto Wolff. But the teams don't have an outright say in the matter, so what about at the very top? It seems pretty clear that the FIA president Mohammed Ben Sulayem would like an Andretti Cadillac entry to be granted. Andretti getting General Motors on board is believed to have been a significant factor in why Ben Sulayem felt it was necessary to start a formal evaluation process, and he keeps talking about it in a positive light. Frankly, we found it surprising that the FIA president has been so brazen, because it could easily be interpreted as him identifying a favourite. Given the process is live and you'd imagine neutrality is important, using an interview with the Associated Press in the United States to publicly wonder how he could say no to a brand like General Motors didn't strike us as a particularly wise thing to do. Ben Sulayem also thinks that F1 has come around to his way of thinking on this matter and has even gone as far as stating this publicly as well. But this seems to relate to him misinterpreting, accidentally or otherwise, comments made by Liberty top dog Greg Maffei regarding General Motors' involvement on the Andretti bid. He said that in the right set of circumstances we would work to get the 11th team, and after acknowledging that GM was interested around Andretti, there are reasons to think that that could come about. Ben Sulayem, like some others, have interpreted that to mean the Liberty position has shifted and that it now agrees with the FIA president that an Andretti GM combination is too good to turn down. But we understand that Maffei was talking in the context of American manufacturers being involved as engine suppliers, as in what could come about is General Motors being involved in F1 in the future in some way, not necessarily as an 11th team alongside Andretti. More significantly, the broader view that F1 would be open to another team if the conditions were right has been expressed for a long time. The stakeholders don't need to pick a new team at all. Though the most recent calls for expressions of interest have ended in new entries, the F1 landscape has changed since then, and the decision makers may determine that none of the prospective entries merit a place on the grid. The growth F1 has enjoyed during the 7 years of Liberty Media ownership and specific changes to strengthen the 10 teams have created a so-called franchise model where the existing entries have more value than ever. Teams are worried this value will be damaged if the bar of entry is set too low. But primarily they don't want to lose part of their revenue, as the prize money pot would be split between 11 teams and not 10. That has led to discussions to massively increase a so-called anti-dilution fund that currently sits at $200 million, so if a new team is able to enter for 2026 or 2027, they would have to pay 2 or 3 times that amount. Critics of this move believe the teams are just being greedy, and there are even some suggestions that it is inherently flawed, because the anti-dilution fund is relative to team revenue, not team value. As the prize pot that the teams share hasn't increased by nearly as much as team values appear to have, then the teams aren't giving up that much more for an 11th entry than they were previously, so why should a new entry suddenly be paying triple the anti-dilution rate? But for now, that's a side issue. All you need to know is that there's a massive commercial consideration at play, with no consensus on who should swallow any potential financial loss caused by expanding the grid. The bottom line is that F1 will need to be convinced that there is a really good commercial reason to greenlight a new team, assuming the FIA does decide that any of the applicants have also made a compelling case on a technical and financial level. And this is just our opinion, but would be surprised if this results in an 11th entry being granted. It's not a judgment against the applications submitted, because obviously we aren't aware of the cases that have been made. But we're leaning this way simply because there's a pretty divided landscape in F1 at the moment, and the commercial rights holder and its governing body don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, especially the subject of more teams. This is not, as some have tried to make out, a straight decision for the FIA alone. While this is a process overseen by the governing body, the commercial rights holder has a key role to play. If either F1 or the FIA have an issue, no entry will be granted. There needs to be a unified position, and that hasn't felt like the case whatsoever. Given the hesitance and division to date, it would mark a significant shift if any new team got sufficient support to be selected. That's how we read the situation, but what do you think? Are you expecting an 11th team to be accepted, and if so, which team would you like it to be? Let us know in the comments, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel to see more videos on F1 in the future.